Great to be here this evening. I'm Karen Klein. I'm a founding partner of Bloomberg Beta, which is a venture capital firm backed by Bloomberg LP. Also here tonight is Tech NYC. It's important that startups have a voice in local policy. So what Julie and the Tech NYC board, including the folks on the podium and Tim Armstrong, who's also in the audience, is doing is really important. Thanks, you guys. Bloomberg is really proud to be a founding member.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. Okay, so now we're going to jump in. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Ron, I want to ask first question to you. You've been one of the most prolific tech investors across the country and, frankly, the world for a long time. And I know you're spending a little bit more time out here in New York now. You've been here since last week, I believe.
Right.
Curious, what are you seeing here?
Well, SF City, funny enough, we only invest domestically, SV Angel. And about, let's say, 6-7 years ago, SV Angel saw the bubbling up of technology in New York, and we said, hey, we want to be part of that, because given the law of averages, you'll have great companies getting founded in New York, just like you have great companies getting founded in the Bay Area. And if you go back 6 or 7 years, just 5% of the SV Angel portfolio was from New York City. Today, it's more like 15 to 20% of the portfolio. We have about 50 companies in the New York area right now. And so SV Angel, we don't have an office here, but we have very close partnerships with all the leading VCs here, namely Fred, Lair Ventures, Shanna Fisher. But we actually make the pilgrimage to New York a couple of times a year and visit with all of our VC partners, our corporate partners. I was at ESPN this afternoon, and then with the portfolio companies themselves. So we see the activity in New York percolating, and we want to be part of it.
And Fred, I've heard you say that the tech industry here is 20 years old, but you've been here doing it for 30. So over that time, kind of curious what some of the trends, building on a little bit what Ron said, how you've seen things change and where you think we are now in New York.
Well, I think what happens in any community where there's a lot of startup activity is that you have a few companies that emerge in the first decade, and then they have an exit. People make a lot of money, and then a lot of people who worked in those companies go on to start new companies, and then you have this sort of exponential effect. And Silicon Valley is the perfect example of that. They've been at it now for 5 or 6 decades, and it's just amazing the amount of startup activity and startup financing activity that can happen in a community that's that mature. But here in New York, it's really become, I think, self-sustaining, meaning that if all of a sudden no money came into New York City from outside of this area, and thank God it does. People like Ron and many others are coming to New York to invest. But even if that weren't to happen, I think there's enough activity now in New York that it could self-sustain itself. And then the other thing that's happened is that a lot of the other industries that have been resident in New York for a long time, the real estate industry, Bill's somewhere here in the room representing the flag, and the finance industry. We're here at Bloomberg, which I like to think of as a hybrid company, half finance, half tech. They also now are becoming more technology enabled, investing in tech companies, building technology inside their own companies. And so it's really quite significant part of the overall economic activity of New York. And you might know this number better than I do, but the tech sector created some pretty large percentage of all new jobs in New York over the past few years.
It's about, I think, 3 or 4%.
3 or 4%.
Yeah, which is significant. What do you guys think? This is kind of for both of you. And Fred, you wrote about this actually a little bit on your blog yesterday. Actually, I'm going to read a quick quote from your blog back to you. The way I think about the startup sector in the U.S. is that the first tier is Silicon Valley. More than half of all startup activity and startup funding activity happens in the Bay Area, which now includes SF and the East Bay. the second tier is New York City and LA and Boston. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of VC and this, if this is true, this idea that we're kind of post-geography, and how much placemaking matters and how much geography matters, both as you guys personally look in your own investments, but also what you see for the industry.
I think geography matters because you want to be in these markets physically from time to time. Ron said that they make pilgrimages to New York twice a year.
Well, the team 4 times a year.
4 times a year, right. So it's hard to be in 50 markets, right? Because you can't make pilgrimages to 50 markets 4 times a year. So I think every investor kind of gets into this mindset of how many places can I realistically invest in? And you have to go to Silicon Valley. It's Mecca. If you really are serious about being in the tech sector, you can't ignore what goes on in Silicon Valley. And then you got to pick your spots. One thing I think I maybe got wrong in that blog post I wrote was the significance of Seattle as a creator of great tech companies. And you think about it, you say, how could you have not included a city that's created Amazon and Microsoft and so many more great companies? So you could argue that maybe Seattle belongs in that second tier as well. But we go to maybe 5 or 10 cities in any significant way in a given year. And so that's what makes the venture capital business. It is a geographically constrained business. You can't go to 100 cities a year. At least I don't think you can.
Yeah, SV Angel, we focus really on New York, Silicon Valley, obviously, and LA. But one of the benefits that having a Silicon Valley investor make the pilgrimage to New York is a lot of the companies that we have in New York, they need our Rolodex. You can imagine, because we're in Silicon Valley, we're very close to Google, Twitter, Facebook, Apple. And when our companies need a senior management contact at those companies, because we're on the West Coast and we're around and networking with them all the time, we have easier access to like executives at Apple. So a huge benefit we can give the New York companies in our portfolio is access, to companies like Apple and Facebook. So it's a really nice partnership and synergy.
So how do you reconcile the fact that you've got a lot of these successful tech companies that started in the Bay Area and expand, come out here, and then they meet up with regulation here, oftentimes for the first time? We saw this in Airbnb, we saw this in ride sharing, and then they go back and they end up meeting regulators in other places as well. But in some ways, I think one could make the case that New York is a first mover for regulation. And what does that look like? And what does that look like for companies who are deciding where to start?
Well, I hate to say it, but I think the regulations are everywhere. If you look at Uber and Airbnb, there's probably not a state in the union that doesn't have some obtuse, archaic law that didn't anticipate, ride sharing or home sharing. So these legislative difficulties really exist everywhere. And the more tech NYCs and SF cities, we can have around the country, the more we can evangelize for the tech community. Warby Parker, there's a lot of very archaic laws around optometry that they're going to face and need our support for. The great news is consumers are on the side of tech. You cannot stop innovation, and consumers resent it when they're told that they can't adopt innovation. So we're on the side of right, but like it or not, we have to defend ourselves.
I think maybe the reason that you perceive it that way, Julie, is that New York's a very large market, and so a lot of companies, if they get started in San Francisco or if they get started in Seattle or Los Angeles or whatever, it's one of the first cities that they might go to outside of where they got started because they can access a lot of customers really quickly. And so and it may be that they run into regulatory pushback more quickly here than other places. And it's also hard for people to navigate the landscape in a city that they don't know, where they don't have any relationships, and so they might run into problems more quickly here. And that's one of the things that Tech NYC should be doing, right? We should be providing a service to tech companies all around the world. When they run into trouble in New York, they could at least knock on our door.
That's right, because to my mind, all these companies, as you said, they're going to want to come here. If they don't start here, they're going to want to come here. And we want to ensure that this is a place that is welcoming. I mean, I think that's a big part of what we're going to be building, because that's one of the issues here in New York.
Yeah, the beauty of Tech NYC is the tech community has now mobilized and can be proactive rather than reactive. In a lot of these cities, the tech industry is always on defense. With Tech NYC, you're going to be on offense. Makes a huge difference.
I wanted to spend just a couple seconds talking about a few specific issues, a little bit kind of a lightning round, if you will, because you both have been community leaders in your own cities in specific issues. Fred, you've really dug in on computer science in schools. Ron, you've really dug in on issues around gun control, patent reform. You've been incredibly helpful.
And immigration.
Immigration. Everyone's been really helpful on that, too. And so I'm kind of curious, number one, to hear if you guys have anything to say about those specifically. But number two, what I'm interested in is understanding how you kind of decide where it makes sense for you to spend your time, to do your giving, and to be active.
Well, I like to think of places where I can contribute more than just money. I obviously contribute a lot of money to the causes that I'm involved in, but I like to contribute some expertise. I'm a software engineer, by history. My first job out of school was writing software, and I felt like I could help our school system get more computer science, not just with my money, but also with my knowledge of how one might want to go about doing that. So I think that's a big thing. You can't solve every problem. So you might as well focus on helping solve problems that you know something about.
I agree. And focusing on problems, problems and issues that you are passionate about. You can't spend the kind of time that Fred and I do on education and immigration if you're not really passionate about it. In the case of gun safety, I had Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman from Arizona, in my home by coincidence the night of the Sandy Hook killings, and I had an epiphany. I never got involved in gun safety. I was apathetic, but I had an epiphany that we're going to get involved in this issue, and it's a movement. Because fighting the NRA is not easy. Thank God we have Michael Bloomberg and every town on our side. And we have, thank you. I wish the mayor was here. But with gun safety, it's a movement. We have the Sandy Hook Promise. We have Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly with ARS, a super PAC. You need to turn these into movements. Immigration reform is something near and dear to the heart of tech, but a comprehensive immigration reform, not just getting visas for tech jobs, but we need comprehensive immigration reform. And Mark Zuckerberg and Forward.us, and Fred was the first person on the East Coast to adopt Forward.us, which is another movement that's going to stay persistent until we get immigration reform. These are all long-term issues that we have to be committed to.
That's really interesting to me because a lot of the entrepreneurs, a lot of the engineers I meet with, they're used to quick responses. They're used to iterating. They're used to seeing results. If they don't see results, they want to go back to the drawing board and find those results. But the issues we're talking about, just as you were saying, Ron, really long-term. And it's, for those of us who work directly in the policy space, I find I spend a lot of time having to kind of explain what it is you're saying, that we slowly move the needle, and one day we'll make great change. But sometimes it's hard to make that connection, I think, for people in the tech industry. industry?
Well, I think on the gun safety and immigration, I've been involved in supporting those issues, and it's a frustrating time to be, engaged on those issues. It feels like we're going backward, not forward, and it's easy to just throw in the towel. And Ron told me in a private meeting last week that Mark Zuckerberg has doubled down on immigration. Instead of throwing in the towel, he's doubled his commitment, right? So that's the kind of thing that we need. We need people like Mayor Bloomberg and Mark Zuckerberg and others who have enough staying power that they can be leaders on these issues over decades. Because the politics on these issues is really complicated, and people on the other side are equally passionate, unfortunately.
And it's important because it also sets a tone for younger entrepreneurs and for those coming in the next generation.
Yeah, I think tech as an industry has to be impatient. You can't let innovation slow down because somebody else will go out innovate you. But on these policy issues, we do have to be patient, and we have to see it through.
You're here. Okay, I want to get back to couple more quick questions about business stuff, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. What businesses are you guys looking for right now?
Well, Ron and I had a little meeting last week, and we were talking about that question. And an area that we're really interested in is machine learning, artificial intelligence. The big companies in this sector have been investing heavily in this technology for a long time and are starting to make some really big breakthroughs. But we think that small companies are going to need to have access to this technology, and they can't have the same data advantages and engineering advantages that the big companies have. So we like the idea of machine learning as a service, providing it via an API and developer tools so that small companies can get the same access to the technology as large companies. So that's one area that we're pretty excited about.
I agree with Fred on machine learning. We're interested in on-demand services, messaging, enterprise software, fintech. But at SV Angel, our mantra is internet software only. I started SV Angel 22 years ago while Mark Andreessen was still a student at the University of Illinois, and said, we're just going to invest in internet software. And one of the reasons I think we have a good reputation is 22 years later, what does SV Angel do? We invest in internet software. And believe me, it's a big enough space now that we should probably focus on just a smaller sector of it. But I believe we're in the early days of the internet. Software is eating the world, as Mark Andreessen says. Whole new areas like virtual reality, bioengineering, machine learning, early days for these huge multi-billion-dollar potential markets.
And I would point out from that laundry list, the policy implications are huge. So people like me will be employed for a while, I think. I've got one last question, and then I'm going to open it up so that other folks in the room can ask questions too. It's a two-parter. What you expect from the current generation of entrepreneurs and what you're looking for in the next generation of entrepreneurs.
Well, I'm not entirely sure where the generational cutoff is because, we see entrepreneurs who are very young. So is a 16-year-old entrepreneur in the current generation, or are they in the future generation? But in any case, I think what strikes me is that entrepreneurs are getting more and more capable of building things themselves. It used to be that we would see a lot of entrepreneurs, and I go back. Now, I'm going to try to go back to like the 1980s and early 90s. We used to see a lot of entrepreneurs who were really more sort of financially oriented type of people or sort of general management oriented type people. They'd come in with a business plan. And now we see entrepreneurs who are making stuff day one. And I think that partially that's because more and more people can make things, like the skills of whether it's software engineering or just making in general have become more democratized, and so people can make things at such an early stage. But if I had to pick one thing that's changed a lot over the time that I've been an investor, it's that entrepreneurs are much more skilled at making things along with one or two colleagues, where it used to be they'd have to build a whole team to do that, and that's why they were more sort of financially driven, and now they're more skills driven. And I imagine that in the future that it'll even become more so.
Yeah, I think founders are becoming more and more agile. You have accelerators like Y Combinator that really help make it turnkey. And I think, in the next generation, bioengineering these are dual major students. They've got a biology major and a computer science major. That's pretty amazing. Right now, there's not that many of them, but I think in the future, there'll be scads of them because the opportunity is so big. The other thing that I would hope to see with entrepreneurs in the future is they follow the example of Mark Zuckerberg, who early in his career at Facebook got civically engaged with immigration reform and got philanthropically engaged with the hundreds of millions of dollars that he's already given away and pledged to give away 99%. I applaud him for being an example to all entrepreneurs that your money doesn't get given away after you die. Enjoy it. Give it away while you're in your 30s. He's going to give away, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars long before his 40th birthday. How cool is that? It's a great example for every founder.
Great. Okay, I want to open it up if we've got some questions for the audience. Right here? Is there?
Yeah, Ron, you mentioned that you were excited.
I think we've got a mic.
Oh, sorry. Hi. Thanks for coming. Ron, you mentioned that you were excited about OnDemand. Wanted to learn a little bit more about what potential things there excite you, also like in general, but also what verticals you think might be more interesting than others.
Well, OnDemand, we put companies like Postmates, Instacart, DoorDash into that category. I call it there's a new economy coming around called the convenience economy. And these companies all satisfy what I call the convenience economy. It's mainly in metropolitan areas where people are busy and they need the convenience of getting services on demand. The Wash.io, where they wash your clothing. Again, software is going to eat the world in on-demand services. So we see it as a very early multi-billion-dollar sector.
Right in the middle there.
Hi, my name's Asher. 2 weeks ago, I was an MBA student at Cornell Tech. So you guys have talked a lot about the community of investing and the geographies of investing. And now we're starting to see more and more a lot of investing happen offshore or offshore happening in recently Saudi Arabia investing $3.5 billion in Uber. So I was wondering if you had thoughts about the pros and cons and maybe implications of that starting to happen.
Well, I imagine that's been going on for a long, long time. I mean, the capital has never really known boundaries. I think the more interesting thing, I don't think it's that interesting that money from China or Russia or Saudi Arabia is getting invested in Uber. I think what's more interesting is entrepreneurs in China or Russia or Saudi Arabia starting companies, which traditionally has been harder. I think China is probably the greatest success story in startups over the past 10 years, just in terms of what's happened there. So to me, if you want to talk about a global story, it would be the globalization of entrepreneurship, not the globalization of capital.
And I would just add that we always want these companies to get funded, so exactly where the funding comes from, I'm less fussy about that. We just want them to get funded.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Coco, originally from China. Thank you for the comment. I'm very encouraged. Yes. So I'd like to know a little more about NYC, Tech NYC. You mentioned it would be would be offensive than defensive. What does that mean? Could you elaborate? Thank you.
Well, it's Ron's words, but I think what he means is that we can go out and start building bridges with the people who might potentially overreact to something, but we can be proactive about building the bridges and building the relationships with government, with regulators, with the community, with citizens of New York, advocating for the things that we care about to make them understand us before they have some overreaction and then there's some bad situation, which is kind of what happened in San Francisco with a few issues. So it's trying to get out ahead of these issues and build consensus around them and common alignment.
And be proactive on the issues. Proactive is the...
Hi, Xavier from Open Collective. So in the spirit of creating value for more people, what is your take on B Corps from the investor perspective?
Well, we like it. My partner Albert, the question is about B Corps or public benefit corporations. These are corporations that have built into their charter the ability to both be mission-driven and for-profit. My partner Albert was a big supporter and driver of the Delaware Public Benefit Corporation law that got passed a few years ago. We have a number of companies in our portfolio that are either B Corps or public benefit corporations. We don't require it. Entrepreneurs should feel free to build their companies however they choose. And so we're not going to mandate that. But if a company wants to do that, we're very happy to be investors in them.
It's a great trend.
We've got time for one more question. So we'll
Make it a good
keep
one.
it over here. Yeah, no pressure.
Hey, yeah, Fred, you mentioned that, San Francisco's been doing this for many years. The companies that were started, those that were really successful, those people went on to start companies. What can we as software engineers and you as investors do to make it so that the companies that get founded have more diverse founders, such that the people that they hire are more diverse, so that we get fewer people that look like us as software engineers and more people that look different?
Well, it's a great question. The question is, how do we get more diversity in the founder community? I don't think there's one answer to that. I think there's many answers. A part of the reason that I am so committed to the computer science work in K through 12 is that you want to get more diversity in people who actually know how to have the technical skills. So that's one piece of it. I think you need more diversity in the investor community because I think investors tend to, I am an investor, I know it. There is a bias. It's a human thing. It's not a nefarious thing to invest in things you're comfortable with. And so it's easier to say yes to an entrepreneur who reminds you of somebody that you either grew up with or worked with. So we need more diversity in the investor community. Those are two big things. And I also think that we need to educate people that they can be entrepreneurs. My wife does a lot of investing in women entrepreneurs, and she tells me that women often don't feel qualified to do something the way that men sometimes do, and she's constantly encouraging women, you can do it. Like, you can be an entrepreneur. Even if you don't think you can be, right? So we need to encourage people who don't see themselves necessarily as natural entrepreneurs to be entrepreneurs. So and by the way, there are probably 10 or 20 other things that need to happen. This is a multifaceted challenge. But the thing is, it's in the air now. People are talking about it. We weren't even talking about it 10 years ago, so it gives me great hope that we're going to really do a lot more on that.
I don't feel like we were talking about it 5 years ago, so it's made a huge amount of progress. I think the biggest thing is STEM education in the schools is the biggest way to attack this.
Thank you guys so much. So now we have the treat of Mayor Bloomberg joining us, and Mayor Bloomberg obviously is a founder and an entrepreneur himself. So it is perfect that he's going to come up and say a few words.
I really wanted to come here and listen to them, but I just came from 3 events all in about half an hour, so it was the best I could do. But I got here, and I will watch a rerun of what you said tonight. My girlfriend and I will lie in bed, and that'll be on the television. And we'll ask her in the morning what they say. But seriously, back in '81, when we started this company, I didn't know very much about computers. Nobody even knew anything about computers. In fact, computers almost didn't exist. When we started the company, the PC had not been invented. I know none of you here are that old. We actually built our own hardware, and my job on Saturday afternoon was to drive up to Connecticut to a barn where our engineer was working, and I soldered the resistors and capacitors into the circuit boards. Then when along came PCs, I said, we got to get out of this business. And we started using PCs because we couldn't compete there. And the internet hadn't been invented. Al Gore wasn't around at that time. And Al doesn't like that joke. But we literally built our own internet. I was the service guy, I was the sales guy. I couldn't write code, and I didn't even know that much about what people needed. We'd run a line from here to Chicago, and I'd go knock on doors in Chicago till we found somebody who'd rent us a closet, and then we'd have local lines out to our customers from that closet. And I think we had a 9,600 baud line, which was the fastest you could get from here to Chicago, and 4,800 out to the terminals. So, you hit a button, and then you could go get a cup of coffee before the screen filled again. And when the internet came along, switched over. And then we had, there was something that came along called distributed processing, and I said that's not the way we should design our system, so we didn't, and I got blasted in the papers for not understanding we were going to be put out of business, except that we had something that came to be called a cloud. And I'm a big believer in putting things together because it's easier to compare and to work on all the data and whatever. We certainly made plenty of mistakes, but with a lot of luck, things turned out pretty well. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is to help entrepreneurs get going and to show them that you're not going to do it right every time, but if you stick to your guns, a woman or a man, and you have a vision, good chance that you'll be successful. If you have revenues greater than your expenses, you'll do very well. If your revenues are less than expenses, Darwin takes care of you. But in this day and age, you can go back and start again. When I came to Wall Street in 1966, you were going to have one job for the rest of your life. And if I hadn't gotten fired from Salomon Brothers, I would now be working for Citibank, and my girlfriend's a director of Citibank, so I'd be working for my girlfriend. No, I wouldn't, but that's neither here nor there. I did want to thank Dean Huttenlocher of Cornell. Right across, you can see the buildings going up for the new engineering campus, because Cornell came here, and there's a guy named Bob Steele who deserves all the credit for getting this going. Bob Steele was vice chairman of Goldman when he left. He went with Paulson to save this country, which they really did. He was chairman of the board at Duke University. He's still chairman of the board of the Aspen Institute. And Steele had this idea that we could get graduate engineering campuses here. And because of Cornell coming here, NYU built a whole new campus with Poly, and Columbia built a whole new campus up in Washington Heights. So it really is a lot of extra brain power coming here, and that's going to help the local community. It was a really bold vision for Cornell to take a risk, but they deserve a lot of credit, and Huttenlocher is running the whole thing. And Julie, thank you for leading our tech community here in New York City through Tech NYC. And Karen Klein, who's hiding back there someplace, of Bloomberg Beta, is helping our Future Founders program, which I know many of you are a part of. And I'm sure Fred and Ron have told you all the secrets of being successful. They were investing in startups before it was cool. Probably a good time to get in. Companies like Google and Twitter and Foursquare and PayPal. Nobody had heard of them then, but they certainly have heard of them now. I know starting a company, I remember the first day I was just by myself. Second day there were 4 of us. Today there's 20,000 of us. And I can tell you it was a hell of a lot more fun those first few days. I just came from a Goldman Sachs. They have a program to help 10,000 small businesses. And I was asked, what's the success? And I said, it's hard work. You got to be the first one in the morning. You want to start that coffee pot so when your employees get in, the coffee's hot. You don't want them standing around waiting. And the evening, you want to sweep the floors. You don't want them to do it because you can sweep floors, but you can't do what they do, and you want them to do it. And then, by the way, don't drink a lot of coffee because you'll just have too many bathroom breaks. And if you avoid lunch and vacations, you're going to be very successful. But all kidding aside, I think you got to make a decision. You can't have it all. And you've got to decide what you want to do. If you want to be a champion, an Olympic champion, you work 24/7 and you don't have a life other than that. And if you don't want to win, don't do it. But I think starting a business is the most wonderful thing in the world. But it really does require hard work and dedication. And when the going gets tough and even your family says, well, I know you know what you're doing, but why don't you hedge your bets, maybe go get a job and you can do this on the sidelines. If you have a vision, go for it. That's my advice. And, if it doesn't work out in this day and age, when I came, I said I would have stayed all my life at one company. Today, that's not true. People move around. There aren't many people who have done more for the tech community than Fred in New York City and Ron in San Francisco, and thank you for both. Ron helped start SF City, and both have advocated on behalf of tech companies, and they find ways to have the tech community give back. And Fred has worked with our team in City Hall to help start Computer Sciences NYC and to bring computer science education to more public schools. Jill, you were talking about, or Fred was, about diversity, gender diversity, particularly in engineering. I don't know how it turned out, but at Johns Hopkins, my alma mater, 45% of our early admissions to the engineering school were female. Now, that's a hell of a lot better than the 35%. I don't know what the numbers are overall afterwards, but we've just got to get more people, male and female, rich and poor, every part of this world interested in technology. And it's something where you can be judged based on how well you do, not your lineage or anything else. And I've always liked things like that. That's why I'm addicted to golf. The ball goes in or it don't go in. And there's no arguments about it. And anyways, cities benefit from tech firms, and we have always believed that cities are the future. That's where people are going to live, and we have to make sure that we give everybody a fair chance here. I'll leave you with a thought, because I'm the only thing between you and cocktails outside. I gave the commencement speech at Stanford a few years ago, and I said, this is the only school in the country where every guy dates a woman named Siri. A lot of the women nodded and said that's true. They weren't happy about that. But seriously, you want to be in a big city. If you see lots of people in Silicon Valley, they're now trying to live up in San Francisco and bust down. Companies are going to Austin and Boston and New York and other places. If you're going to build products for the world, you want to be where the world is. And you want to be where there's a whole diverse culture. And I love Silicon Valley. It's great to play golf, and Stanford is one of the great universities in the whole world. But nevertheless, I still think that if I want my kids to grow and live, and they do in a big city. It doesn't have to be New York. It's just it happens to be the best. But other than that, well, I'll leave you with another thought. You say the best. Life expectancy in New York City is 3 years greater than the national average. So if you have friends who live elsewhere and you really love them, just get them to move. Thank you all for coming.